Hello, I'm Yancey Weller, and for 7 years I gave everything I had to keep my family's restaurant alive. Then in one night, my stepbrother pointed at me in front of a packed room and called me a thief. My stepmother told me to get out before I could stain the family name. The worst part was, my father looked me in the eye and whispered, "I believe you, but I can't protect you." They thought they had buried me for good. What they really did was start something they could never control. Before we get into it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Then let me tell you how it all began with a set of keys, a family restaurant, and a lie that was built long before that night. I used to think a set of keys could mean belonging. Most days I came in through the back door before the dinner rush had a chance to wake the place up. My hand knew the locks without me looking. One key on the ring had worn down smooth over the years, the edges softened from too many openings and too many closings. I used to take comfort in that. It made me feel like I had earned my way into the building, even if nobody ever said it out loud. Weller House Grill sat on an older stretch outside the busier part of Joliet, in a brick building with tired booths, framed family pictures, and the kind of front windows that looked warm in the evening, whether people inside were happy or not. Folks around town knew the restaurant by our last name. What they did not know, at least not fully, was how much of the place stayed standing because of work nobody ever put in a photo. I unlocked the back entrance, stepped into the narrow hall, and did what I always did. I checked the walk-in first. The cooler had been temperamental for months, and I had learned not to trust good luck where old equipment was concerned. Then I flipped on the line lights, glanced at the opening checklist clipped near prep, and ran my eye over the notes in my own handwriting from an older rough patch, when we had been too close to losing the place to waste time pretending things would fix themselves. There was always something small waiting for me. That afternoon, it was the freezer seal not sitting right, a leak under the soda gun, and a supplier note about produce that should have been confirmed hours earlier. I took care of each one the way a person ties his shoes or locks his car. Not because it was glamorous, because if I did not do it, it would become somebody else's problem at the worst possible time. 7 years earlier, after my father's health scare, the restaurant had nearly slipped out from under us. Vendors got short with us. Equipment started giving up. Good staff left. Bad weeks piled on top of each other. I stayed. I covered holes, picked up shifts, learned things nobody had planned to teach me. There was one winter stretch when I slept in a booth for 2 hours between a late catering pickup and an early delivery because going home would have wasted the only rest I had. I never wanted to be the face of the place. I just wanted to keep it alive. When the dishwasher clogged, they called me. When a prep cook quit on a Friday, they called me. When the refrigeration started making that low grinding sound that meant trouble was coming, nobody looked for Israel. They looked for me. By 5 o'clock, the dining room had begun to stir. A server asked if I had already approved a vendor change. A delivery driver came in through the side and asked where I wanted the dry goods stacked because, in his words, "You're the one who actually knows where anything goes." That was the truth of my life in that building. People came to me for answers and went to them for permission. I noticed the front had been dressed up more than usual. Fresh flowers at the hostess stand, candles spaced more carefully on the ledge, a new little display near the entry. Somebody had been editing the restaurant's face. That was when I saw the frame. It hung near the hostess stand where every guest walking in would catch it before they found their table. I slowed without meaning to. Under the photograph was a neat little caption in brush script. "Our family kept this place alive." For a second, the room seemed to quiet around me. In the picture stood my father, Jay, in the middle, Aileen beside him, one hand resting lightly on his arm, Israel on the other side, smiling like he had carried the whole building on his back. Warm light, polished faces. A clean story. I was not in it. The worst part was that I knew that frame better than any of them did. The night before, I had held the level against that wall, while one of the hostesses handed me screws from a paper cup. I had even patched a rough spot in the plaster earlier that week so it would hang straight. My fingerprints had probably been the last ones on the glass. I stood there longer than I should have. Not long enough for anyone to ask what I was doing, but long enough for something inside me to shift. I had spent years telling myself that staying in the background was part of keeping the peace. Some people did the talking. Some people did the lifting. I could live with that. What I had not understood, not fully, was that they were learning how to tell the story without me in it. It was not forgetfulness. It was practice. That was the moment I realized they were not pushing me aside by accident. They were making sure the town would forget I had ever held the place together at all. Over the next several days, I started noticing something worse than being left out. They were arranging the room around my absence. It showed up in little ways first. Aileen had the host stand polished, like it belonged in a magazine spread. Fresh flowers appeared near the front window. New table tents were set out with our logo printed cleaner than usual. She moved through the dining room with that calm, tidy way of hers, straightening a chair, smoothing a tablecloth, adjusting a frame by half an inch. None of that was strange on its own. Restaurants live and die by presentation, but image work turns dangerous when it is not there to support the truth. It turns dangerous when it is there to bury it. Israel started appearing exactly where a customer's eye would land first. Near the front door, near my father, near the register when a vendor walked in, near the kind of conversations that sounded casual but carried weight. If someone important stopped by, Aileen found a reason to place him within arm's reach of them. Meanwhile, I was doing what I always did. I checked an order that came in short on tomatoes. I swapped out a sticky receipt roll at the service printer. I caught a prep mistake before it made it out to the floor. That was the split in that building. Out front, a version of the family was being staged. In back, the actual day still depended on me. By late morning, the lunch crowd had thinned enough for the regulars to settle in. I was coming out of the kitchen with a replacement tray of bread when I heard Aileen say, "Israel's stepping into more responsibility these days." She said it lightly, like she was talking about the weather. The man she was saying it to was Mr. Carmichael from the local bank. He had handled business accounts in town longer than I could remember. Israel smiled and gave that modest little shrug people use when they want credit without looking hungry for it. "Just trying to help keep things moving," he said. I nearly laughed at that. He said it standing 3 feet away from a problem I had already fixed twice that week. No one asked who had handled the supplier issue that morning. No one asked who stayed late after close when the cooler started acting up. No one asked who still had grease under his fingernails from tightening a hinge in the back hall before lunch service. In family businesses, the person nearest the camera can become the story, even when somebody else built the whole day. My father was there for some of it, sitting in his usual chair near the front with a cup of coffee he no longer finished while it was hot. He did not introduce Israel as the future. He did not have to. His silence did enough damage on its own. By late afternoon, dinner prep was in full swing. The line had started calling for extras. A bus tub stacked too high near the dish pit. One of the younger servers came looking for me because the soda line had lost pressure again. I was halfway under the counter checking the connection when laughter drifted in from the dining room. I looked out just long enough to see Israel standing near the front window with Aileen and 2 people from a local church group that rented our banquet room every winter. He had one hand in his pocket, the other spread open as if he were explaining the place to them. He looked comfortable there, not because he knew the work, because he knew how to stand where the work would be mistaken for him. A few minutes later, Tammy Jo Mercer came in wearing a denim jacket and sensible shoes, the way she always did when the weather began to turn. She had been eating at Weller House Grill since before I was old enough to reach the prep sink. She spotted me carrying a stack of clean glasses and smiled. "Well, there he is," she said. "I was just telling your daddy I figured you were the one keeping this place running." For one brief second, the truth sat in the air, plain and warm. Then Aileen stepped in with a smile polished enough to pass for kindness. "Oh, Yancey just helps when needed," she said it gently. That was the part that cut. Not sharp enough to start a scene, just smooth enough to make the lie sound reasonable. Tammy Jo's expression changed, only a little, not enough for anyone else to comment on. But she heard it. I know she did. I stood there with the glasses biting cool into my palms, hearing the sentence settle over the room. Just helps when needed. 7 years of opening doors, fixing failures, covering gaps, carrying nights that should have broken us, and she turned it into something you might say about a nephew who stopped by to move chairs before a cookout. Nobody argued. Nobody looked scandalized. That was how those moments worked. The room learned the version it was supposed to believe, and life kept moving. I carried the glasses where they belonged, then went back to the kitchen because the printer had started jamming again, and somebody had to deal with it. My body kept doing the work. My mind stayed with that sentence. The photograph in the front had not been a slight. It had been instruction. This was the next step. They were teaching people how to think about me while I was still standing there in my own skin. I had spent a long time telling myself that being needed counted for something. By that evening, I could hear the truth underneath her voice. Needed was useful. Needed was temporary. Needed was never the same thing as chosen. The hardest part was that one person in that building still knew exactly who I was, and for a long time, that had been enough to keep me there. After that afternoon, I stopped hearing Aileen's voice as one sentence. I heard it as a pattern, and once you hear a pattern, you start remembering all the places it had been hiding. The hardest part was that one person in that building still knew exactly who I was, and for a long time, that had been enough to keep me there. My father had grown quieter over the years. That was the plain truth of it. After his health scare, something in him pulled back. Out in the dining room, he let conversations pass that he once would have corrected. He let people fill in blanks he should have owned. He let Aileen smooth things over, and he let Israel stand where a stronger man would have said, "Not yet." But in private, he still showed me he knew. There had been nights after close when he sat behind that small office desk, one hand pressed against his chest. Invoices spread in front of him and said, "Stay a minute." I would lean in the doorway, already tired, already thinking about the next morning, and he would tap a number on a page and ask, "Do you see what I'm missing?" Most of the time I did. Once, during a bad stretch when a vendor nearly cut us off, he looked up at me and said, "You always see what the others miss." It was not a speech. He did not say it in front of staff or family or anybody who could have made it matter. Still, I carried that line for longer than I should have. Quiet love can keep a man loyal far longer than open cruelty ever could. A few days after the thing with the photo on the wall, I found myself thinking about another picture. Not one hanging in the dining room, one hidden away. It had been years earlier. I was dropping off a stack of receipts in the office. Dad had stepped out to take a call, and his desk drawer was half open. It stuck sometimes, so when I nudged it shut, I caught sight of a photograph underneath an old ledger. He came back before I could do more than glance at it, but the image stayed with me. It was from one of those terrible winter weeks when we nearly lost the place. Snow piled at the curb, pipes complaining in the walls. We had reopened after a furnace issue, and in the picture I was standing beside him in a stained sweatshirt, exhausted and grinning like surviving counted as winning. The corners of the photo were bent. He had looked at it enough for the paper to soften. Then he saw me looking and pushed the drawer closed too fast. That was my father in one image. He kept proof of me close enough to touch, but never close enough for anyone else to see. That was the contradiction that kept me in place. I did not stay because the system was fair. I stayed because every now and then my father would hand me a key, ask my opinion, trust my judgment, or let a scrap of gratitude slip through when nobody else was around. As long as he still trusted me behind closed doors, I could pretend the rest of it would fix itself. A lot of people stay in broken families for one good reason, long after all the bad ones should have sent them out the door. A week later, after a long close, Terry Maddox caught me near the prep station while I was wiping down stainless steel and stacking pans for the morning crew. The last ticket had died 10 minutes earlier. The dish pit was still rattling. Someone in back had started draining tea urns. Terry scraped his knife across the cutting board once, set it down, and gave me a look I had learned not to ignore. "Don't be alone with cash," he said. I looked over at him. "What?" "You heard me." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cigarette, rolled it between two fingers, then tucked it away again. Terry never smoked inside. Half the time, I think he just liked having something to do with his hands while he decided how much truth to hand a person. "I'm saying," he went on, "if there's money getting counted, moved, signed off on, you make sure somebody's with you. And don't put your name on a thing unless you read every line." I tried to shrug it off. "That seems a little dramatic." He gave me a long look. "Men like your brother don't learn the floor. They wait for the floor to be handed to them." I did not answer right away. Terry rinsed his board, dried his hands, and lowered his voice. "They're moving pieces now." I wanted to say he was wrong. I wanted to say my father would never let it go that far. I wanted to hold on to the version of things where Aileen was just controlling and Israel was just lazy, and none of it added up to anything worse than family politics. Instead, I asked, "You really think it's that bad?" Terry's face did not change. "I think when people want you gone, they start with access. Then they work on the story." That stayed with me the whole drive home and most of the night after. Up until then, I had explained everything away. Stress, timing, hurt feelings, Aileen being Aileen. Israel enjoying attention more than he should. But Terry's warning took the comfort out of that. It gave shape to something I had been trying not to name. I was not just being edged aside, I was being prepared. That was the first night I let myself consider the possibility that they were not waiting for me to step aside. They were getting ready to make sure I couldn't stay. For the next couple of days, I moved through the restaurant with Terry's warning stuck in the back of my mind like a splinter. I did my work, I kept my head down, I watched, and then, on a gray afternoon, the watching turned into proof. The next time I reached for a lock I had opened for years, I found out Terry had not been warning me too late. He had barely warned me in time. I came in through the back like always, keys already in my hand, my body halfway through the motion before my thoughts had caught up. The metal was cold from the weather. I slid the right key in, turned it, and got nothing. Not resistance exactly, just a dead stop where there had never been one before. I pulled it out, looked at it, tried again. When you do something for 7 years, your hands learn it before your mind does. Mine still believed that door belonged to me. The lock told the truth faster. A second later, the side entrance opened from inside. Roxine Pike stood there with a stack of takeout menus tucked against her hip. She looked at me, then at the key still in my hand. "Oh," she said. "Did nobody tell you?" That was the first humiliation. Not the lock itself, her seeing it. "Tell me what?" I asked. She shifted her weight. "Mrs. Weller changed a few things. Mrs. Weller, not Aileen, not your stepmother, not even we. Just a title, like this was policy now." I stepped inside without answering. The hallway smelled like bleach and onions, same as always. But the place no longer felt arranged around me. It felt managed. That feeling followed me all through the afternoon. My vendor login failed first. I was trying to confirm a produce adjustment, and the screen kicked back a plain white box with 2 words sitting in the middle like a verdict. Access denied. I stared at it, entered the password again, slower this time, then got the same answer. A few minutes later, I found the invoice printed and sitting on the office desk, already initialed. Israel had signed it. His signature leaned across the line with the lazy confidence of somebody who liked being seen doing a job better than actually knowing it. Later, when I went to print updated prep sheets, the office printer asked for a new password. I did not have it. When I asked Morgan whether the safe combo had changed, she gave me an apologetic look and said, "I was told it's need to know now." Need to know. That one almost made me laugh. I was still trusted to catch shortages, fix staffing gaps, handle vendors when they got impatient, and keep service from drifting into chaos. I just was not supposed to touch anything that made authority visible. They were keeping my hands in the work and removing them from the power. By dinner, the whole thing had a rhythm to it. Small exclusions, clean ones. Hard to argue with if you took each one by itself. Easy to miss if you did not know the place well enough to feel the pattern. And I knew it well enough. The keys on my ring sounded different when I walked. That was the part that got to me more than I wanted to admit. A lighter note against my hip. At some point, one of the office keys was gone. So was the small brass one Dad had handed me years ago when he first trusted me with the supply cage. I remembered that day more clearly than I wanted to. He had dropped the key into my palm and said, "I need somebody around here who doesn't have to be asked twice." Back then, I took it as faith. Now I stood in the dry storage hall listening to the shortened ring tap against my leg, and I understood something I should have seen earlier. They had not taken the whole ring. Just enough to show me what they thought I was allowed to touch. I finally caught Aileen alone near the accounting room just before close. She was standing beside a stack of folders, one hand resting lightly on top of them, as if even paper had to wait for her permission. "I need to ask you something," I said. She looked up with that calm expression she used when she wanted to make irritation sound civilized. "Of course. Why am I locked out of the back entry? Why did my vendor access get pulled? Why is Israel signing invoices he doesn't even read?" She did not flinch. That was what bothered me. No guilt, no scramble, just composure. "We're organizing things a little differently," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you need." I looked at the folders under her hand. Bank papers, insurance forms, something official enough that she had turned the top sheet face down when I walked up. "I'm still the one fixing the problems," I said. "If I'm trusted to keep the place running, I should be trusted to get into the rooms where the problems start." That drew the smallest smile from her. Not warm, not amused, certain. "You don't need access to everything anymore, Yancey." She said it softly. That made it worse. A sharp voice invites a fight. A soft one assumes a decision has already been made. In that moment, I understood she was not reacting to a situation. She was managing an outcome. She had already decided what my role was going to be, and what unsettled me most was how sure she seemed that I would simply absorb it. I went back out to the floor and finished the night because that was what I did. I handled a late table, helped the line with a backup on pasta, took a call from a delivery guy who had the wrong address loaded into his phone, but underneath every task, another part of my mind had started working. What else had changed? Who had access now? Which systems were being tightened? Which doors were being closed before anyone said my name out loud? By then I understood something I had been trying not to say out loud. They were not waiting for me to matter less. They were building a version of the place where I could be removed cleanly. Once I started looking at the restaurant that way, I could not stop. Every routine had a shadow behind it. Every small change seemed to belong to something larger. When the fundraiser week started, every change that had seemed minor on its own began to line up like pieces set down by a careful hand. The dining room looked different before we even opened. Tables had been shifted to make room for extra guests. Silent auction baskets sat near the front with neat little cards tied to the handles. Donation envelopes were stacked beside a handwritten sign thanking the community for standing by my father. The whole place carried that nervous kind of kindness people bring when sickness is involved. Folks were coming to help. That was what made it dangerous. Nobody wanted unpleasantness on a night like that, which made it the perfect night for a lie. Aileen moved through the room like she was hosting a church supper instead of a fundraiser tied to medical bills. Calm, thoughtful, measured. She checked place cards, adjusted centerpieces, reminded staff to keep the front warm and gracious. Israel stayed where he could be seen. He drifted near the host stand, near donors, near my father's table. Never near the office. Never near the register. Never near anything that would leave his name attached to the hard part of the night. I found the printed schedule clipped beside the service station and felt my stomach tighten before I even read the whole thing. My name was attached to too many points in the chain. I was scheduled to float service issues, help oversee the close, and handle the envelope transfer from the dining room table to the office. That alone was wrong. On a night with that much money moving through the building, the process should have been split, witnessed, and documented. That was how my father would have run it before he got tired and before Aileen started smoothing over everything that looked inconvenient. I read the sheet again. Morgan had been shifted away from the office handoff. Roxine was planted near the front, smiling at guests and checking coats, where she would be seen but useless for anything that needed a second set of eyes. Israel somehow was listed as guest relations. I almost laughed at that. He was dodging the burden and staying visible. I was being tied to the mechanics. That was when it became plain. Somebody wanted my name at the end of the handoff chain. I found Aileen in the hallway outside the accounting room. "This schedule makes no sense," I said. She did not even look surprised. "It makes enough sense for tonight." "No, it doesn't. If you're moving that much cash through one set of hands on a night like this, you'd better have witnesses." Her face barely changed. "You're being awfully tense." "I'm being careful." Israel stepped into the hallway before she could answer, like he had been waiting just out of sight. "You always do this," he said. "Every time something matters, you make it sound harder than it is." I looked at him. "I've kept this place standing through worse nights than this. Don't hand me a mess and call it management." That landed harder than he expected. I could tell by the way his mouth tightened. Aileen stepped in before he said more. "No one is asking for a speech, Yancey. We're trying to do something decent for your father. Please don't turn it into a problem." That was the trick. Make caution sound disrespectful. Make procedure sound emotional. Make the man asking for clean hands look like the one bringing trouble into the room. I went back to work, but I stopped giving anybody the benefit of the doubt. The little things kept coming. The hallway camera outside the office blinked wrong. Not dead exactly, but uneven. The envelope count sheet had been set down out of order, then moved again. Aileen asked me twice where the donations would be kept before close. Israel appeared near the office once, then again 20 minutes later, too quickly for someone who had supposedly been charming guests at the front. At one point, I saw Roxine standing near the entrance with a clipboard she had no business needing. She was not helping operations. She was part of the scenery. People were not just being scheduled. They were being placed. By early evening, the whole place still looked like a fundraiser. It just no longer felt like one. It felt like a stage. I understood something then that I had been resisting for days. Peace was over. Whatever this was, it had already moved past exclusion. It was heading toward accusation. I did not know what shape it would take, only that the room had been arranged to leave me nearest the damage when it came. So I started doing what I should have done sooner. I watched who touched what. I remembered who stood where. I tracked the envelopes with my eyes every time they moved. I paid attention to doors, to glances, to timing. By the time the first donors started coming through the front door, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was waiting for me that night had already been decided. I should have left the minute I understood the room had been arranged against me. Instead, I stayed. The worst part was that I still walked into it anyway, because some part of me believed that if I stayed careful enough, the truth would still be enough to protect me. By 6 o'clock, the place was full of the kind of goodwill that makes people lower their guard. Church women in cardigans were arranging raffle baskets near the front window. 2 older men from the VFW shook my father's hand and told him he looked stronger than he had a month earlier. Someone brought in a tray of bakery cookies nobody had ordered, just because that's what neighbors do. Donation envelopes started stacking faster than we expected. Aileen moved from table to table with a soft smile and a hand on somebody's shoulder every few minutes, as if grace itself had put on low heels and come to host the evening. Israel stayed where faces could find him. He greeted people at the front, thanked them for coming, nodded solemnly when they mentioned my father's bills. He looked like concern. I looked like labor. The kinder the room felt, the less chance I had if someone decided to stain me inside it. I kept moving, refilled water pitchers, shifted extra chairs, took a late call from a florist who had the wrong entrance, checked the donation table twice, then 3 times. I told myself I was being careful. The truth was, I was already bracing. Things kept happening that made sense only if you looked at them one at a time. The envelopes were moved from the front table to a side station, then back again. The tally sheet ended up half covered beneath a church bulletin that had no business being there. Aileen asked where I planned to secure the donations once the dinner crowd settled, then asked again 20 minutes later as if she had forgotten the first answer. The hallway camera outside the office was still blinking wrong. Not dead, just off. Every small thing had an explanation. It was the shape they made together that felt wrong. At one point, I went looking for Morgan because I wanted another witness anywhere money changed hands. She had been sent to help with dessert service. Roxine was planted near the front with a clipboard and a smile, completely useless where the real risk sat. I stood at the edge of the office hall and understood something with a new kind of clarity. They were not just placing people, they were removing the right ones. I found Aileen near the register while a line of donors waited to drop envelopes into the basket. "Not tonight," I said quietly. "Not with this much cash moving through this building." Her smile stayed in place. "Excuse me? It needs to be counted in pairs, logged in front of another person, sealed and witnessed. You know that." She lowered her voice. "Don't turn your father's night into a scene." Before I could answer, Israel stepped in beside her, already wearing that tired expression people use when they want to make your caution sound like a flaw. "It's a family fundraiser, Yancey. We're not handling state secrets." "No," I said. "We're handling money tied to my father's treatment. That ought to matter even more." He gave a small laugh. "You make everything sound dramatic." That was the moment I knew they were not careless. They were comfortable. I still tried to keep rails on the night. I asked for a second set of eyes on the envelopes. I made sure the first count was written down. I checked the stack twice before carrying it anywhere. For a few minutes, I almost thought I might force the process back into something clean. Then Aileen leaned toward me and said, "Just set those inside for a minute. I need to greet the Petersons." The envelopes felt heavier than paper should have felt. I carried them toward the office because leaving them out front was worse. The hallway was strangely empty. No Morgan, no Terry, no one but me and the hum of the old vent above the accounting room. I placed the stack where I was told, logged the count, looked once at the camera light. It still blinked wrong. When I stepped back out, Israel was suddenly there at the far end of the hall, as if he had drifted over by accident. "Everything squared away?" he asked. That question sat wrong in my ears. Too quick, too easy. I nodded once and walked past him, but the feeling stayed with me. I had become the last visible link in a chain I did not design. The next 20 minutes stretched in that awful way time stretches when your body knows something before your mind is willing to name it. The room stayed warm. People kept donating. My father smiled at someone's story. Silverware clinked. A chair scraped across the floor. Somewhere in the back, a server laughed. Then the air changed. Not loudly, just all at once. Somebody said an envelope could not be found. A chair pushed back hard enough to make heads turn. My father looked up, not yet understanding. Aileen went still in that careful way people do when they are about to make something official. Across the room, Israel turned and looked straight at me. In that instant, before anyone said my name, I knew they had chosen the night, the room, and the sin. The moment they said the money was gone, the whole restaurant seemed to lean away from me before a single accusation was even spoken. Then Israel looked at me with a kind of certainty no innocent man should ever have to recognize in someone else's eyes. He did not look confused. He did not look alarmed. He looked ready. He stepped forward, lifted his hand, and pointed straight at me in front of donors, staff, and half the town that had come to help my father. "You're nothing but a thief," he said. "I've known it all along." That was the moment the room changed shape. The clink of silverware seemed to stop in the middle of the air. A woman near the raffle baskets turned so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Somebody behind me said, "Oh my Lord," under their breath. False accusations are most dangerous when they are spoken as if they are not accusations at all, but overdue truth. Israel sounded satisfied, like he was finally saying what everybody else had been too polite to admit. I answered once, "No, I did not take that money." My voice came out steadier than I felt. I did not raise it. I did not beg. I knew better than to hand panic to people who were already dressed for judgment. Aileen moved in right after him, cool as winter glass. "Do not you dare stain this family's name," she said. "Not tonight. Not in front of these people." That was her gift. Israel made noise. Aileen gave it meaning. In one clean turn, she pushed the whole thing out of the world of facts and into the world of shame. It was no longer about a missing envelope. It was about disgrace, betrayal, family honor. I could feel older guests pull back from me without knowing a thing beyond the tone she chose. She was not trying to find the money. She was fixing my place in the room before facts had a chance to breathe. Then came the part that still sits wrong in my bones. Israel said my coat should be checked. Aileen said if I was innocent, I would not object. Roxine stepped in too quickly, eager in the way weak people get when they think power might notice them. "This is ridiculous," I said. "Then you've got nothing to worry about," Israel replied. They turned out my coat pockets right there in the back hall. Roxine held the lining like it belonged to her. Someone checked my locker. Then Israel said we should look at my truck, since I had been back and forth all night. The fluorescent light in the lot made everybody look pale and hard. I should have refused. Maybe a younger man would have made a bigger scene. But I knew how that would play. Angry, defensive, guilty. So I stood there while they opened my driver's side door and leaned in. When Roxine straightened up holding an envelope, the whole thing became larger than anger. It became theater. She should never have been the one touching it. She should never have found it that easily. It was too neat, too clean, too perfectly placed beneath paperwork I kept in the console. By then they did not need proof. They only needed a shape the room could believe. Nobody said that part out loud, of course. People only stared. Some looked embarrassed for me. Others looked relieved that the story had settled into something simple. That was the worst of it. Simplicity. A missing envelope. A tired family. A son who finally showed his true colors. People love a story that lets them stop thinking. Aileen held out her hand after that. "The keys, Yancey." I did not move at first. Her voice stayed level. "Now!" I unclipped the ring from my belt loop and placed it in her palm. She set it down on the counter inside with a hard metallic sound that seemed much louder than it should have. The weight was gone from my side in an instant. The little ordinary pull I had carried for years just vanished. That was when it stopped feeling like they were accusing me and started feeling like they were erasing me. My father finally came toward me then. Not quickly, not like a man ready to stop what was happening. More like somebody walking into bad weather too late to shut the windows. His hand lifted once, then stalled in the air. He would not quite meet my eyes. When he spoke, it was so low, nobody else could hear him. "I believe you," he said, "but I can't protect you." I had waited years for my father to choose me in public. He chose the truth in private, when it could no longer save me. That hurt worse than Israel's finger, worse than Aileen's voice, worse than the envelope in Roxine's hand. Because in that one sentence, he gave me both things at once: vindication and surrender. I did not argue anymore after that. There was nothing left to say that the room was willing to hear. I took my coat. I left without shouting. I walked past the front where people had eaten my food, shaken my father's hand, and listened to my name get ruined faster than it had ever been respected. Not one person stopped me. Not one person knew how. By the time I stepped into the parking lot without those keys at my side, I knew they had not just thrown me out of the building. They had thrown me out of the version of the family I had spent 7 years trying to earn. I did not drive right away. I sat in my truck long after the lights inside blurred into one dull glow. And for the first time in my life, going back inside no longer felt like home. The engine had gone quiet. The heater fan clicked once, then settled. One by one, the lights in the kitchen and dining room went dark, and I stayed where I was, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield like maybe the building would turn back into what it had been if I gave it enough time. It did not. I had spent too many nights in that same lot to mistake what I was feeling. I had eaten cold fries out of takeout boxes there after close. I had loaded produce there in freezing weather. I had once slept sitting up for an hour in that truck before opening because going home had made less sense than staying near the work. I never imagined I would leave that place erased. My hand kept going to my hip by habit. Every time it found nothing. That missing weight said more than anything else could have. No keys, no office, no back door, no place to walk into and call mine. For a few minutes, I almost gave them what they wanted. I opened my phone and started a text to my father. "I'm sorry this happened tonight. I'll stay away. I won't make it worse." I stared at those lines until they stopped looking like mercy and started looking like surrender. I was one apology away from taking the shape they had made for me. Not because it was true, because I was tired enough to think silence might still buy peace. Then I deleted it. Walking away with dignity was one thing. Disappearing under their lie was something else. If I stayed quiet, it would not clear my name. It would only preserve theirs. A little after midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Casey. She never texted me unless it mattered. Her message was short. "I shouldn't be sending this, but the hall camera was down 27 mines. Morgan said Mrs. W went into the office before she told anyone money was missing." I read it twice. A minute later, another message came through. This time from Morgan. "Don't reply. I printed the access log before it got pulled. Israel was in the office hall at 8:41 and 8:49. You took the envelopes in at 8:44. There it was, small, plain. Not enough to save me yet, but enough to tell me I had not imagined the shape of the knife. The night had not been chaos. It had been choreography. I drove to a cheap motel off the interstate because I did not trust myself to go anywhere else. Inside the room, under a buzzing lamp that made everything look older than it was, I spread out what I had. Receipts in my wallet, notes in my phone, times I could remember. Names, positions, doors. I wrote it all down while it was still hot in my mind. Around dawn, Morgan sent one more message. "There's something else. Check the old blue file box in storage if you still can get to your dad's outside office. Top drawer cabinet at the side desk. LaDonna's name is on one folder." LaDonna Voss had been my father's attorney for years. Mostly business matters, lease renewals, tax issues, vendor disputes when they got ugly. By mid-morning, after a bad cup of motel coffee and almost no sleep, I went to the small detached office space behind my father's garage. He still kept old files there because Aileen hated clutter in the house. The side cabinet was unlocked. The top drawer stuck the same way his desk drawer used to. Insides had a worn folder with LaDonna's name in the corner. There were drafts, not finished documents, not signed, but real enough to stop me cold. Operations oversight, future transition review, pending discussion of formal title and compensation. My father's initials in the margin. A handwritten note. Yancey already doing the job in practice. I sat down right there on the concrete floor and read every page twice. The missing money had been the fire. The paperwork was the motive. They had not set me up because of one envelope. They had set me up because if my father ever followed through, I would not just be the man keeping the place running in the shadows. I would have standing. A title. Maybe more. Enough to make me harder to erase. And that was when the whole pattern locked into place. The photo, the introductions, the access changes, the schedule, the camera, the search, the keys, The drafts that never got signed, they had not framed me to explain the money. They had framed me to close the door. Not just for one night, for good. If I stayed the son who stole from his sick father, I could never stand near succession, authority, or any honest accounting of what I had built there. They had needed me morally disqualified before anyone could put anything official in writing. That understanding did something strange to me. It did not make me feel better. It made me feel steadier. I stopped asking the wrong question. Not how do I prove I didn't steal? Why did they need me removed before my father could finish what he had already begun? By then I was not trying to be invited back in. I was building a case. I saved every text, photographed every draft, printed the access log Morgan had risked sending, wrote down the timeline again, cleaner this time. At the top of the page I wrote LaDonna Voss. The son who wanted to be let back into the family was gone by then. What sat in that motel room was somebody else. Somebody who finally understood that truth was not a feeling. It was structure. By sunrise, I wasn't trying to find my way back into their version of the family anymore. I was building the first line of the truth they were going to choke on. The first honest thing I owned after all of it was not the restaurant, not the keys, not even my name. It was the fact that I no longer needed their permission to stand in it. By 9 that morning, I was sitting across from LaDonna Voss with a legal pad between us and every piece of the last week spread across her conference table. She did not offer sympathy first. She offered sequence, camera downtime, Morgan's messages, the hallway timestamps, the access changes, the unsigned transition papers with my father's initials in the margins. For the first time since that night, the truth looked less like memory and more like structure. LaDonna read in silence for a while, tapping one fingernail against the printout of the access log. Then she looked up and said, "This was not a misunderstanding. This was preparation." That mattered more than comfort would have. By afternoon, letters had gone out, one to the restaurant's accountant, one to the bank, one to my father, Aileen in Israel, demanding preservation of records, and a formal meeting before any money, files, or rolls were altered again. Once it moved into paper and law, the story stopped sounding clean. We met 2 days later in the small private dining room at the restaurant. No donors, no crowd, no church ladies carrying pies, just documents laid flat on a table and nowhere for anyone to hide behind good manners. Israel tried first. He talked too fast, the way guilty men do when they think volume can pass for certainty. He said I was bitter. Said I had always wanted more. Said the envelope in my truck proved everything until LaDonna slid the timeline across the table and asked why the camera outside the office had failed for 27 minutes, why my access had been pulled before the accusation, and why Israel had been in the hall twice during the exact window he claimed to be greeting guests out front. He stopped answering cleanly after that. Aileen held on longer. She called it confusion, tension, family strain. She said nobody had intended harm. Then LaDonna placed the draft transition papers in front of her and asked why documents discussing my formal operational role existed months before the fundraiser, and why the same week those papers stalled. My permissions began disappearing one by one. That was the first time Aileen lost the room. Not because I embarrassed her, because she could no longer control the frame. What finally shook them was not shame. It was consequence. The accountant ordered an outside review of the fundraiser records and recent access changes. A donor who had heard what happened withdrew support until a written correction was made. Israel was removed from handling any money or vendor decisions. Aileen was forced out of day-to-day control until the review was complete. In a town like ours, word moved the way it always does. Quietly, completely. My father looked older in that room than he had the night they threw me out. After the meeting, he asked if I would stay a minute. We ended up in his office, just the two of us, with the door closed and the old desk between us, like one more thing neither of us had figured out how to cross. He opened the drawer I had watched him guard for years and took out the photograph. The one from that winter after the furnace trouble. Him seated, me standing beside him, both of us tired and still foolish enough to think hard work could protect a place from everything. "I should have done right by you sooner," he said. I let that sit there. He swallowed once and looked down at the unsigned papers LaDonna had left for him. "I kept thinking I'd fix it when things settled down. Believing me in private didn't save me, Dad." He closed his eyes when I said it. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. He apologized then, plain and late and real. Not enough to restore what had been lost. Enough to stop pretending he had not helped lose it. A week later, LaDonna handed me a small envelope with recovered personal items. My keyring was inside. I tipped it into my palm and heard the familiar metal click against itself. The worn key from the back entrance was still there, smooth at the edges from years of use. I stood with it in my hand for a long moment. For years, I thought those keys meant I had a place there. Standing there with the truth finally in my hands, I understood they had only ever meant I knew how to keep the doors open. I did not clip them back onto my belt. That part was over. I went by Weller House Grill one last time near sundown, not to reclaim it, but to see it clearly. The brick front looked the same. The windows glowed the same, but it no longer held my whole life inside it. It was a building, a business, a wound, not a map. I never went back as the man who used to wait for somebody inside to choose him. There was no next chapter inside that old version of my life. Only the one I would write without asking anyone in that house to tell me who I was.